Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we are talking about family dysfunction in Supernatural. All kinds of families, Winchesters, and more. But before we get into that, let's let our panelists introduce themselves. Beth?
Hi, I'm Beth Dolgner. I write paranormal fiction and nonfiction, and I've been a Supernatural fan since the pilot episode, way back when it originally aired.
Carol?
Hi, I'm Carol Malcolm. I'm the director of the Urban Fantasy Track at Dragon Con, and we do cover Supernatural. We've been doing that since 2013 is when the track was first formed, and the show got assigned to me, thankfully. So I have had at least one or two panels every year, and I've been enjoying that. And I very much appreciate being part of this. So thank you very much, Gail.
Sure. Stuart?
Hi, everybody. I'm Stuart Jaffe. I'm an author of over 40 novels across numerous urban fantasy series, best known for Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries. And like Beth, I've been a fan of the show since it started way back when.
And Elektra.
I'm Elektra Hammond. I'm a writer. I am copy editor. I too have been watching it since that first pilot had that fascinating little description. You can find me at conventions when they actually exist again, and running around on the internet until then.
And I'm Gail C. Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, near future, post-apocalyptic, and more. And as Morgan Bryce, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. I'm kind of obsessed with Supernatural. If you hadn't figured that out, I run a fan group online. And I think all of my modern series are worlds that Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. So we're talking about family dysfunction in Supernatural. And let's start back with the Campbells, you know, Sam and Deanna and Mary as a hunter. Even before Yellow Eyes showed up, not sure everything was humming along on all the cylinders there. What's your feeling about the Campbells as a family?
We're all just jumping in, I take it.
Yeah, just jump in. I mean, I can call on people, but.
No, that's me you're talking to. I'll just yap. I think, you know, when you look at John as a father, that makes everything dysfunctional around him. As a husband first, or even a son. I mean, the man, I'm trying to think if he ever had a moment where he wasn't kind of screwed up in his head. And then you put him in a very screwed up situation of being a monster hunter.
Mm-hmm.
And it just poisons the well that of everybody who's around him, you know?
Yeah. Well, and you know, Mary came from a monster hunting family and wanted out, and then got pulled back in because she made a deal to save his life. And as far as we know, she never told him about that deal. That's a kind of big secret to keep from your husband.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
it's that guilt thing that they, I mean, that ran through all the generations. I'm going to make a deal with the demon, and sometimes that same damn demon, and to save your life, and I'm not going to tell you about it. Mary did it to save John. John did it to save Dean. And Dean did it to save Sam. And it kept going. Apparently, it's just a family trait.
Well, and
it's like a savior complex thing.
Yeah, you could argue that Sam's relationship with Ruby was his version of the deal to try to get Dean back, or at least avenge him. So yes, it kept on going.
Yeah, I would love to see like a family history and see some of the stories from all of these past generations, because I think, you know, like you said, that this dysfunction goes back generations, and I want to know those stories and what kind of crazy things the past generations got into, especially with their hunting.
Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah,
we get a better, go ahead, Carol.
I was just going to say, it just goes to show you that how, you know, those earlier parts of the story that we don't always see until later, for one thing, that, you know, how much of an impact those have on what happens to people in the future. And, you know, I think sometimes when people are making these deals, they're not necessarily thinking that far. You know, they're not thinking, how is this going to impact my children and my children's children's children, you know, that kind of thing. So it was kind of an interesting aspect to that family dynamic to find out some of that information.
Well, there was
it's weird though that I was going to say it's weird that they don't think about it that way though, because
I agree.
They're dealing with such biblical issue. I mean, literally God and heaven and hell and all that. And, you know, if there's anything, you know, even if you've just kind of glossed through the Bible once, is that a curse goes on to the generation and generation and generation. And you would think these Winchesters who are steeped in it every day of their lives would know better. But, you know.
There is one version of the world where John actually did everything right. The alternate Sam and Dean that show up right at the end of the series, where they like worship their dad because he's a marvelous businessman, but they don't seem to have a really great life. I mean, the two of them have grown up hunting monsters, and they have private planes, and, you know, they lead preppy lives, but it's not like they have wives or girlfriends or children or lives. They just run around chasing monsters. They're rich, but they don't seem all that happy.
They're not even allowed to watch porn.
Or drink beer.
Yeah.
So there just doesn't seem to be a version where they get to have normal lives. I mean, if Dean apparently had not dragged him away and kept him from being a lawyer, Sam was going to end up being a vegan lawyer with no family. Theoretically.
Yeah, we saw that in at least that was one of the alternate worlds. Well, and we found out later that Mary was still sneaking away after she was married to John to go on hunts. So there was more than one thing she wasn't really being honest about with him.
It's hard to give that up.
I'm sure it's very, you know, to be in a life-threatening situation and come out alive is got to be a adrenaline rush unlike anything else, especially when you know you're saving the world and all these things. So I'm sure there's an addictive quality to it. I think there's a savior quality in that's inherent in them, and then you add on to that just the fact that they and a small, relatively speaking, a small group of people are the only ones who know the truth about the world that we all live in, puts them, it would be impossible for them to have a functional family. It just, how do you have all those things combined and be functional in any sense?
Well, it seemed there were a number of hunters who had other things going on in their lives, and they would just hunt when something came up or when someone called them in to help. We always got to see the real fanatical hunters who were, you know, the boys were doing it full time, and we were living by hook and by crook and by,
but even the ones who, but even the ones who were like part-time, they were lying about it to their spouses. They were, I mean, we don't know I don't think they were very functional either. And most of them end up dead anyway. So,
right.
You know.
Not a long life expectancy in that field, right?
No, unless you're a Winchester, then you get to come back from the dead quite a few times.
Well, we did see Caesar and his partner in the Chitters. They killed the monster that killed the one man's brother, and then they were retiring, and they were, I think, moving back to Mexico, and they weren't going to hunt anymore. They were done. So at least they got out and had each other.
Mm-hmm.
Beth, what are you thinking? You've been quiet up there.
I was thinking how I think Stuart really nailed it when you said savior complex, because I was thinking about all the times that especially Dean has talked about, like, oh, I hate this life. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to go on vacation. But if not us, then who? I mean, that's kind of the general attitude. Right. And so I feel like it's very much a sense of like, well, I have to do this. This is my burden to bear. And I can't imagine the conflict that attitude alone would have with a spouse or any kind of a loved one or family member, regardless of whether or not you were being secretive about it. I think that just having that kind of weight on your shoulders has got to be an enormous conflict in a relationship.
Well, we see pieces of it. If you've ever like talked to people who grow up in a family where one of the parents is in a helping profession, maybe it's a doctor or a nurse or a firefighter or an EMT or a minister, sometimes those people get so caught up in the saving part of their work that they forget to be around for their spouse and their kids, and things don't go well at home. So in that sense, the Winchester's burden, as you put it, is kind of writ large, but we see that sort of thing happen to more normal people every day.
Yeah, which I think makes Sam and Dean more relatable, because even though they're hunting monsters, the feelings that they're having and the conflict it's creating is still very, very relatable.
Yeah. Well, and
especially in the beginning, in the early seasons, there for Sam in particular, there's still this attempt to okay, I'll help my brother out this one time, and then I'm going to go back to college and have a normal life again. They keep thinking there's going to be a way out, or I'll sacrifice myself and my brother gets to have his life rewritten into a beautiful life. But eventually they give it up, and they're just like, okay, we're gonna go have to kill God now, because that's the only way out of this.
What else is left, right? Yeah.
I mean, and if you go back to that Campbell generation and to Henry, so Mary saw the demon kill both her parents and would have killed John if she hadn't made the deal. That's got to mess with your head. As far as John knew, Henry disappeared. Henry abandoned them. He went to work and never came back. So we don't know how that affected John's mother. Did she up and leave him? Did she marry
just
again?
Check out.
I'm a nasty drunk. I mean, we don't know. But so both of them are coming into their marriage with a lot of baggage.
And it's sort of weird that he never even knew that his dad belonged to a weird lodge.
Mm-hmm.
That there wasn't even using that as a cover. He didn't even think his dad was a Mason or something.
Weird ceremonial cufflinks.
Yeah, he had no inkling.
Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking that has to set up something in John from an early age of feeling abandoned. And of course, John Winchester's A+ parenting, he had a lot on his shoulders, but he maybe didn't set the gold standard.
Well, but he did much better with Adam.
Mm-hmm.
He there had to have been some residual guilt there, that when he had another kid, he decided he was going to teach this one how to play baseball and not make him be a hunter. And it's really unclear why he did that.
Yeah.
Also, he didn't tell the other kids that they had a brother.
Right.
Yeah,
there was that. Yeah.
Surprise!
I wonder if maybe John recognized the pattern, the generational pattern, and thought, well, this is my chance to break that and give somebody in the family a clean start. And
mm-hmm.
Didn't work out so well, but at least he tried, I guess.
I could buy into that theory, especially because it's a recurring pattern all the way to the end of the series, is that they're constantly trying to break the pattern to the very end. I mean, that's just, everything is always an attempt to stop this from recurring over and over. Whatever pattern you want to pick. I mean, I think every season is essentially about that.
And I don't know that the not telling the older kids about the oops kid is all that unusual, given what people are finding out when they go do ancestry.com. I had a friend find out she had a half sister over here she never met or heard about. I don't think it's all that uncommon when people have complicated situations. So, surprise.
Right.
Not to mention, John and Dean are not the most, let's sit down and share our feelings and stories kind of guys. Sam would be spewing it out in a second. But
Dean and John both get better with that, which I thought was one of the wonderful things with the series lasting as long as it did. By the time you get to Lebanon, they're both talking, and in ways that they couldn't have been early on, but it took them long enough.
Well, Stuart, your point about repeating, kind of repeating the whole patterns, either trying to get away from, but even trying to get away from the pattern as a pattern, if you keep repeating it. And that kind of becomes a vicious circle, I think, when you come to when you're talking about dysfunction, because it becomes something that you might be trying to get away from it, but the way that you're trying to get away from it is not necessarily the way that's going to work or the way that is actually building something healthy. So, I think part of the problem for all of these people in the family is that this is what they knew, and that was, they're trying to do the best with what their own basic experience was, I think.
And there's all sorts of hints of dad would go off and leave them. And then whenever they had established any sort of meaningful, okay, we've been in a place for a while, we've made some friends, John would pick them up and say, okay, we're going someplace else now. So they got really used to this idea of we just walk out on people. And they continued to do that as adults. Whenever they started building up meaningful relationships, Dean especially would just rip up and walk away. And when he finally developed a relationship that he didn't want to walk away from, he finally realized he had to because he was putting them in danger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah. He had girlfriends and friends, and the only people that remained constant in their lives were people like Bobby and Cass, who could take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny you say that, because Cass is, to me, because of his immortality, makes him the only friend or family member eventually that they can count on. Because even as much as they love Bobby, he died. The people that they love, either they leave to protect, like you said, or they die. And because of the world that they live in, of being monster hunters. So in a weird way, it's looking back, it makes sense that Cass is the one that's stuck around, and they could never leave because he's still going to be there no matter what.
Well, and even he had his moments, when he decided to be God and sucked up all the Leviathans and then disappeared and kind of blew up.
Yeah.
And then he was kind of on the fence with heaven for a long time on whether he was a friend or not. And then he went to purgatory with Dean and left Sam stranded. So yeah, he still had that immortality going for him most of the time, but it didn't always protect him from some of the Winchester fallout.
Yeah.
That's a good phrase, the Winchester fallout. I think we're going to use that in some of our rewind.
Well, he had to grow as a person also.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he started out without much of a personality, and he grew into being a person through all of the various trials and tribulations he went through.
And the times he lost his power and finally understood more about what it felt like to actually be human.
He's actually a very interesting version of, I don't know what you would call it. There's an archetype. I think of like Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation, you know, of these non-human yet human-like characters who are constantly trying to become human. But Cass is very interesting because he actually does at times, and even though he ultimately is not human, more than any other characters I can think of that are in that archetype, he becomes humanish, or at least it alters him. And like Data, since I brought it up, is ultimately always an android, and you know, he longs to be human, but it never is going to happen. Even when he's had his programming changed so he could be kind of human-like, it ultimately backfires and he reverts back to being just an android who any human qualities were projecting on him. But that's not true of Cass. Cass actually remembers his experiences, and those experiences have altered him from the Cass we knew from the beginning. And I find that a fascinating change on that archetype.
Yeah, he's able to learn empathy, and I think he's probably one of the best. It's one of the best pieces of character development in the entire series, because he changes so much from when we first meet him, when he's
well, and
he's just not likable.
More so when he becomes a father.
Yeah, in some ways, Stuart, what you're also suggesting makes me think of Spock in Star Trek. You know, half human, half Vulcan, the two sides always at war, and becoming more able to express those emotions without seeing it as a weakness as time went on, but still conflicted about it. Yeah. So we've got the Winchesters, but then I don't think anybody that they really encounter has a normal family upbringing. Maybe Garth, because he's got a nice solid werewolf family and they are who they are, but Jodie's got the girls who are all traumatized.
I'm just laughing at the fact that you can say in the same sentence a werewolf family is normal. I mean,
right.
You know,
that's one of the most normal families in this.
Yeah. And you're right. Yeah. I like that character too. I was glad that we did get to see him a little bit in the last season. But
yeah.
And really got a happy ending.
What's that?
He really got a happy ending, and he even went back to being a dentist.
Yeah, really. And you know, just the fact that he did manage, you know, he was one person that kind of did keep his hunter roots and kept doing it, you know, as you were saying, kind of part-time, but he did manage to be able to say, okay, well, I'm going to go home, and this is, you know, what our family is going to, you know, do for the evening. And yeah, they did look like a normal family, werewolves or not, you know, they still, you know, kept up. And it was more than a facade. I mean, they really seemed to, you know, have that bond, and they thought it was important. And okay, well, I do this other thing some of the time when it needs to be done, or at the very least, I'm going to pass on the information to either the Winchesters or to some other hunters who can take care of it, you know, if he's not going to go dive feet first, you know, himself. So I think that was a very functional way to be able to deal with knowing what that world was like, and then actually becoming part of that world, and still maintaining what he admired about the human world.
Well, Garth's kind of the National Guard version of a hunter, where maybe he goes out and hunts, but then the rest of the time he's the normal guy.
Right.
He's a dentist. Yeah. But Is there anybody actually, any hunters that like get into hunting and have normal lives aside from that? It seems that most people get into hunting because something awful, killed your family.
Yeah.
Bobby's
the
wife.
Things they hunt, there are very few nice ones that they hunt. So generally speaking, if you ever discover that this world exists, something bad happened.
Mm-hmm.
Either you end up a monster or your family gets killed by one, or you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Which actually, I think, points a lot to, the very part of the reason I think, Gail, you were saying nobody has a functional family is everybody's got, they never, I don't know if they ever actually say it this way, but all these hunters are walking around with PTSD like you can't believe,
Oh, yeah.
And it's got it. And since they all love to keep their secrets and not talk about anything, it just destroys them in other ways.
I love the episode where they go undercover to the psychologist who turns out to be a shifter. And they're supposed to be role-playing family therapy. And then it kind of all gets real.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. There's a lot of unaddressed trauma there that would make hash of anybody's head. Then more than one incident of it if you keep chasing these things.
Well, how about Gordon? Mm-hmm. Gordon's lost his sister to vampires, and he's decided he's now going to kill all the vampires, and he doesn't care who gets in his way. He'll just kill them.
Yeah, he's a mercenary, and they're just, yeah.
Well, and we ran into a number of hunters who we may not have gotten their backstory of how they got into it, but if you thought Sam and Dean had flexible ethics, these guys had no ethics at all. And I'm thinking of Walton Roy and the hunters that came after Sam. These were not, the top of the barrel kind of guys.
Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting idea that, if they found out, as I think, Stuart, you're the one who mentioned, or maybe it was Elektra, that the reason that they typically got into the field was because something had happened to them, and so, something terrible, that they lost someone and found out that this world existed, and okay, let's go. So it's kind of interesting that they somehow are able to tap into it and find other people who are, part of this same network. Because it's definitely a network. So it's kind of curious to me how they managed to tap into it in the first place, but I don't know.
Well, John went to see Missouri, and Missouri knew something about the lives, and somehow he ended up at the Roadhouse. So I think it may have been following the breadcrumbs, and you meet somebody and they send you to somebody else.
You start hunting monsters, and when you're doing it where you're doing research to find these things, and eventually, in a more like in the real world, let's say, Carol, you decide tomorrow you're going to become a criminal and start, I don't know, running numbers and all that. Eventually you're going to find other criminals. Just
sure.
The world is, you're going to either find them in good ways, or you're going to step on the wrong person's territory. Somehow you'll bump into somebody. And I'm sure, and I get the sense that it's the same with, with the in Sam and Dean's world, hunting monsters it's a subculture. It's there, but the majority of people don't even see it. So those who know about it are going to actively or accidentally seek each other out.
Well, one thing that came out when they were talking to the British men of letters was that the British men of letters were trying to recruit hunters, and the higher level, smarter hunters wouldn't have anything to do with them. So they were recruiting the bottom of the barrel. And so there's a hierarchy of hunters, and some of them are Southern good old boys who nobody thinks much of, who more often than not end up getting knocked off by the monsters. And there's a higher level of hunters who are going after the tougher monsters, who are sharing information a little bit better. And those are the guys that are hanging out at the roadhouse.
And I actually think of hunters as being almost like, you know, veterans who have served in combat together. You know, that, yeah, they might be dysfunctional family-wise, but they also have this incredible bond and this shared experience that nobody else can understand. And so, although yes, they have a lot of problems, they still have that comfort in each other and they can share in that. And I think that's actually really healthy for all of them to be able to be around people who have experienced the same thing and can empathize with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of the roadhouse as the local VFW.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's also why there could never be a Hunters Anonymous, because they don't know that there's no anonymous to it. They'd say, oh,
Right.
yeah, I know you, I know you.
It would be a fairly small, relatively speaking, group of people, and you'd have to cross paths. So yeah, that makes sense that they would know each other. But you know, of course, the Winchesters aren't the only dysfunctional ones. Let's take a look at Rowena and Crowley and Crowley's son Gavin. And oh my gosh, she sold him for pigs, and not even pigs, because he could juggle.
Oh gosh, yeah, that was something. Now I know that you have something coming up on mother figures later,
Mm-hmm.
but I was in a couple weeks, and I was thinking about that earlier because I was thinking about Rowena. But yeah, if we talk about Rowena as and her relationship with Crowley, yeah, that's pretty, not just sad, but just, I don't know, it's kind of like it's completely twisted. So it's, I mean, it's something that probably none of us could identify with, but I mean, and you know, mainly because we aren't living in the 1600s for one thing. You know, but that's still, yeah, just that whole thing was so sad.
I find their relationship, I find really fascinating in the realm of the show, because like all the others we were talking about, any of the human families, their trauma and dysfunction is related to the fact that they're all hunters, that they have to deal with but these people, quote unquote, you know, Crowley and Rowena, they are the monsters that get hunted. And so they're not, you know, and they're, I mean, well, Crowley is the king of hell originally, so it's he was top dog originally, or almost, Satan aside, and so that puts him in a whole. It's not like he's afraid of any of these puny humans. So his dysfunction with Rowena is a whole a different type of dysfunction. It's much more of a I think in his case, well, I think he's trying to make mommy proud sometimes and can't do it. It's so weird though, because at the same time they're not humans. So even saying what I just said about him trying to make her proud is attributing a human.
But they were human
at the time. Yeah,
they both were human at one point, and they have such a complicated relationship because it's clear that he wants her approval, and it's clear that at times she's proud of him, and at other times she wants to kill him. Mm-hmm. And they keep alternating between trying to kill each other and trying to get the other to love them. And it's one of the more complicated relationships in the show.
Well, and we don't know, we get glimpses of Rowena's past that you get the idea that for all her latent magical ability, at one time she was basically homeless and living in the street and begging other witches for knowledge and not having a whole lot of luck.
That she wasn't ever accepted by the various covens and was told not to practice magic. And none of that seemed to make, you know, a lot of, she just was always craving acceptance and not getting it. So she's a really complex character. The other dysfunctional group you haven't looked at, by the way, is God and the Angels, which is a super fun group, full of dysfunction.
Well, if I can say one more thing about Rowena, it was just the fact that, you know, I liked the way that her story ended on the show. I thought that was an appropriate, you know, talking about character development and evolution. You know, I think that turned out she made the right choice, and you know, just I got a big kick out of some of the comments you'd hear from the you know, like just asides from some of the demons in later episodes of season 15, where they would say, oh yeah, well, Rowena's got it set up now where we have this monthly gathering, or I forget what it was
reception for new souls.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, no, we don't do it that way anymore, we do this now. And it's like, so she went in and streamlined things and made it a little more friendly.
Yeah, she found her place.
I have been to cocktail parties that felt like hell. So being trapped at one of those for eternity.
Yeah, there you go.
That sounds awful.
Yeah.
And before we move on, I want to throw in that I think my favorite dysfunctional relationship in all of Supernatural is that between Dean and Crowley. And I know Carol and Gail, you've both heard me say this before, but I feel like Dean almost used him as a father figure, somebody to be like the authority in his life. And I could probably spend a whole hour talking about the two of them and their relationship, but I always enjoyed just watching that develop between the two of them.
Well, Dean kind of kept looking for father figures. You know, he almost glommed on to Gordon until Gordon went after Sam, and they had Bobby. And so, yeah, he was kind of, he had a weakness for that.
He did, absolutely.
So Chuck, Michael, Lucy, Gabe, and the gang, you know, the Heavenly Brady Bunch, what is there to say about this?
It's a soap opera.
Yeah.
In some ways, I think Chuck and Rowena have more in common. They're both disappointed with their offspring and not afraid to speak their mind in that regard. Obviously, one of them has a lot more power than the other, but I can see some parallels there.
But it was interesting in the last half of season 15 when you get Michael back from the cage and his interactions with Lucifer. And once again, I mean, this was like something out of the old TV show Dallas, where you've got squabbling brothers with inheritance and who does daddy love more, and you know, the good son, the bad son, but I don't want to be the bad son. Daddy doesn't love me enough. He always liked you better.
Well, that's because Daddy was so petulant and wasn't being nice to anyone.
Yeah.
Well, I think your point, though, Gail, makes a lot of sense, because the fact that those people, if they're supposed to be the beginning or they're the precursors, then, you know, in most of these, in just about any version of these stories that you might get, there is that either that competition or, you know, one pair, or you know, maybe a couple of them pair off, and we're going to help each other, and we're going to make Dad proud, and we're going to, you know, beat the, I mean, this happens on the show Lucifer as well. And you know, I mean, just it seems to me as though it's almost this archetype where you have, okay, this is the setup, you know, you're always going to have this the kids who are trying to please the dad, who's basically not possible to please. Not ultimately, not any one person can be the one, even though that's what they're all trying to do, you know.
Yeah, it's also a strange or an interesting situation in that, because Chuck is not a benevolent God, and you know, and in fact, he's an absent God. He just upped and left for most of the show. You know, there's, I mean, that what you essentially have is the parental figure is gone, and all, because, like, how am I trying to say this? Before the show starts or into the first couple seasons, everything is working the way it's supposed to be working, whether we realize it or not, right? The angels are doing their things, the demons are doing their things, as has always been since the dawn of time. But the show comes in at a point where it's starting to break down.
The balance is not there. Yeah.
Right. Chuck is gone, or other than the few times he decides to pop up and stick his finger in things. And you know, as cast shows and as the different seasons where they actually go up into heaven and meet Amanda Tapping and all that, they start seeing that they're trying to figure out who's in charge, since dad isn't, you know, since the parental figure is gone. And then meanwhile, things down in hell are falling apart because Lucifer, who's the one in charge there, has been, you know, locked away. And so everything's just from that point on is in flux. And because this is, I mean, this kind of family dysfunction you see in real families, and if everything is surrounded or controlled, centered around one figure, and that figure either willfully or unwillfully is removed, the whole family starts falling apart. Nobody
like
knows.
Dominoes, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody left a will.
Or even
That's the problem. No one left instructions or a will about what to do if I'm gone. And we've got 3 or 4 of these TV shows going on now where like Succession, where the strong patriarch is, you know, trying to hold on to power while the next generation says, no, we want to be in charge. And all hell is breaking loose. There's 3 or 4 of them going on, and various networks showing various empires. And it's the same kind of power struggle. There was one going on in heaven and one going on in hell. And meanwhile, all the mortals on earth were just trying to hold it together while demons popped in and angels popped in. And
yeah, I almost feel like God and the angels are like a cult, you know, because the angels are so fanatical and so just, I mean, they're just zealous. And then you see angels like Cass who, you know, come to earth and kind of mellow out a little bit. You know, they're the ones that kind of got away from the cults and sort of reintegrated into daily life. But then you have these other angels that have remained in heaven and are still that, you know, zealous, these are the rules, we have to abide by them kind of mentality. So I think of them less as a family and more of a religious cult, really.
I'm never going to be able to hear This Little Light of Mine again in the same way after those prissy angel choir girls all went in and decimated the biker angels and then got back on the bus. It's like, okay, that song's ruined.
Yeah, that was a wild scene. I mean, my gosh, you're like, what are they doing?
But you know, in the end, in Inherit the Earth, Michael's look of betrayal when Chuck doesn't acknowledge all that he has done to earn Daddy's love, and that was kind of heartbreaking. As much as you had come to kind of hate the guy,
right?
There were times when you could really feel for Michael and Lucifer in their family dynamic roles, aside from all the horrible stuff they did because they were superpowered angels. And I thought that was an interesting thing to be able to get us to identify with archangels because Daddy didn't love them. Right. That's kind of a big thing.
It also helps set up just what a major dick Chuck is. Because
totally.
Ultimately, not just for the demons and the angels, but even for the Winchesters and every human being, none of it was necessary. All the 15 seasons of terrible things happening, you know, Chuck could have just made it nice. He could have just been, but no, he let it go and let it be the way it was, and you know, poked at that fire, poured gasoline on that fire a lot of the time, completely unnecessarily.
Yeah.
If anything, I mean, he, not even his sister really could help that situation, and she probably made it just as bad, if not worse.
But in the end, we had Jack, who teams up with Amara, who is reasonably functional thanks to Sam and Cass and Dean raising Sam somewhat better than he was raised. So I thought that was an interesting redemption, that because Dean saved Sam, Sam saved Jack, Jack turned into a much better god than Chuck.
Presumably. Yeah.
Presumably.
Yeah. That's our story and we're sticking with it. Yeah.
Well, folks, believe it or not, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up. As always, the time has flown, but thank you so much for joining us. Let's go around and have everybody say where people can find you online. Elektra, I'm going to start with you this time.
All right, www.untilmidnight.com. That's where you can find anything about me.
Awesome. Stuart?
You can find me at stuartjaffe.com, or just go on to Amazon and put my name in and you will see everything that matters.
Cool. Carol?
Yes, and for me, my, you know, the main thing that would probably be of interest to people here is the Dragon Con Urban Fantasy track. And if you go to Facebook and you type in Dragon Con Urban Fantasy, that page will come up, and the Facebook page is probably the most active of our social accounts as to, you know, timely news. And, you know, we do have a Twitter account as well, and you can search for us there, but that one tends to be more active during con itself, whereas the Facebook page is all the time. Should we mention what's happening Thursday?
Sure.
Okay, and one of the things that that we've been doing, and both Beth and Gail have been involved in this, is that we've been having a supernatural rewind, is what I'm calling it. And every month we have a panel discussing one of the early seasons. We've done season 1, and this coming Thursday we will be discussing season 2. And that information, well, it will be on our YouTube channel. All of that information you can find on the Facebook page. So
awesome. Looking forward to it. Beth?
Yeah, you can find me online at bethdolgner.com. And there's links there to all my books on Amazon, my Instagram, my Facebook, all the fun social media links.
You can find me online at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. And if you put those names in on any of the social media or Amazon, you'll find everything else. And of course, you can usually find me here on Continual. So thank you so much for being wonderful panelists tonight. And thank all of you for watching and listening. We'll have a lot more Supernatural coming your way here on Continual. See you online.